Hi, welcome back to AskSam. I'm going to try to split these up into several unique topics, not so much answering questions, but around specific issues. Today I'm going to talk about autism. Autism is one that seems to be on the rise dramatically around the world. It's not just focused on the U.S., but there's a lot of research that I've looked at over the last several months, very recent research that may be changing the direction at which we attack the autism crisis. So a lot of this that I'm going to present today is out of very, very recent research since 2020. And it's affiliated with the National Institute of Health. And if you want to look at those reports, I'd be more than happy to share those with you. But let's go ahead and get started here. In all of the research reports, they're associating autism with inflammation. So there is a very key component to the cause of autism. And that becomes the real issue here, because we know that once autism raises its ugly head, it's very, very difficult to treat. And you'll see that we haven't been very successful at that. So prevention is the name of the game. And that's what I'm going to go over today, as to how to prevent your children from at least reduce the odds of them getting autism. But first, I'm going to talk about inflammation. What is inflammation, and how does it affect what's going on with the autism children that's on the ASD, the autism spectrum? So inflammation is basically a way of fighting off an attack. So whether it's bacterial, viral, whether it's a chemical toxin, heavy metals, stress-induced, all of these are triggers for the immune response of the mother to attack. Now, one of the things that all doctors recognize is that at the moment of conception, when the DNA merge, that of the female and that of the male, at that instant, that fetus is a separate entity. It is its own body. It is not the body of the mother. It is not the body of the man. It is unique and defined by the combination of the two elements of the DNA. Now, because of that, the mother's body may look at it the same as it looks at a bacteria. It may look at it as an entity. If the mother's immune response is not capable of being suppressed, it could look at that fetus as a foreign object and try to attack it. So we want to keep that from happening. And there is an inflammatory response we're going to go over as to how to keep that from happening. So typically, when the mother's immune system goes after it, it's triggered. I have interleukin 6 here and some other chemokines, but there's interleukin 3, interleukin 33, there's NF kappa beta, and there's interleukin 1 beta. These are all chemokines that initiate a very dramatic inflammatory response to eliminate this foreign object, and that has to be suppressed. The mother's immune system changes dramatically, and that's why we have the placenta. There's some barriers there that nature provides to keep the woman's body from totally rejecting the fetus. Now, after that initial response, it's probably why women get morning sickness. It's their body's immune system almost simulating that it's under some sort of an infection. But it must ramp down. And in the second trimester, you usually see it begin to suppress. The woman's immune responses build up the antibodies to not recognize it as a foreign entity, not attack it, and not attack due to its increased inflammatory response those elements of the mother that would make her normally sick. In some cases, though, that immune response stays elevated. And the four free radicals, the superoxide, singlet oxygen, the peroxyl, and the hydroxyl, primarily the hydroxyl free radical, does cross the placental barrier. And that will wreak havoc with the growing fetus, primarily in the first trimester. It happens at the mitochondrial level within the cell and at the neuronal level in the brain formation. And the fetus will also develop a response to counteract that attack. And in so doing, creates a chemical change in its own mitochondria that will carry over for the rest of its life and manifest itself in the symptoms that we see as autism. We see it in ADHD, we see it in ADD, but it appears to be the same driving force. Here on the autism spectrum, we see that the cases of autism are growing exponentially. It has been shown now with all these research papers that it originates in the womb. So, and it's typically proportional to the inflammatory state of the mother. So if the mother's under a lot of stress, or she's sick, she has an infection, drugs, smoking, these are all inflammatory producing elements of stress, for example, is another big one. Most women are under a lot of stress when they're pregnant. Their emotional level increases. And as a result, their epinephrine, norepinephrine releases increase. When those are processed in the liver, they generate a very high concentration of the hydroxyl free radical. So it's absolutely crucial that these stressors be eliminated, reduced, to keep the child's probability of getting autism at its bare minimum. The best form of measurement of inflammatory disease right now is what's called the high sensitivity C-reactive protein. It's a blood test that you can run. Every pregnant woman should run it prior to and all during pregnancy as part of her normal blood work. You have to request it. Request that the doctor run it. And if that number is less than 3, then you're in a normal state of inflammation. We have to have some inflammation to make our cells work. But if it is chronically or for several weeks over 3, that inflammatory response will be transmitted into the fetus, and the risk or the probability of having a child who is now developing excess neuronal activity, it's a fight or flight reflex, and that will carry over for the entire life of that individual. Studies to date indicate the following. The women with autoimmune diseases are more likely to produce anti-brain antibodies, including interleukin-1, interleukin-6, interleukin-33, necrotic factor kappa beta. These are all chemokines that are stressors, and these will cross into through the placenta into the developing fetus, and it will have long-term effects on the disease state of that fetus later on in life. They do attack the brain tissue of the fetus. They can cross the blood-brain barrier, and especially the fetus at this time is so vulnerable that it can give long-term effects on the development of the brain. Women who have an infection during pregnancy, so viral infections or bacterial infections, which increase the immune response. Anytime the immune response is activated, these free radicals are generated. So it's extremely important that the mother remain stress-free, she have a good diet, stays in a relaxed state during this period, and keep her C-reactive protein less than 3. All of these things are obviously unique to pregnant women, but we can all benefit from these because the same solution to stopping autism will keep even men and women from getting inflammatory diseases. So here's what we've been able to determine from all of the research papers that I've been able to decipher so far. There is no clinically effective drug for the autism spectrum type diseases. Psychoactive drugs only are trying to suppress the symptoms and try to it's more for the parents to calm the child down than it is for a positive effect on the child. The lack of biomarkers. It's very difficult to find one that would measure an antibody unique to autism, and because of that, they cannot develop treatments for it. It's very, very difficult to chase something that you can't even identify what it is. But it does turn out that the high sensitivity C-reactive protein, which is very easy to run, it is the most effective measurement to look at the inflammatory disease state of the mother and thereby be able to reduce the probability of her having an autistic child. So many times I've expressed this, but make sure that your C-reactive protein is less than 3 milligrams per liter. Sometimes it gets reported as milligrams per deciliter. If it is milligrams per deciliter, you have to multiply that number by 10. So if somebody has a CRP of 0.5, but the units are milligrams per deciliter, you've got to multiply that by 10, which makes that a 5. So you've got to be very careful on the units of that. If anyone has any other questions regarding this, please send them through to AskSam. And you can also call the office and at Velasta, and we'll be able to answer those questions in the future. But I wanted to get this out there because these are very, very recent reports, and the mothers that want to be mothers or mothers that are going to have children, please be aware of this, that stress is the primary cause as far as we can determine now, and things that cause your C-reactive protein to become elevated. It is absolutely crucial that everybody measure that level of inflammatory disease state by using that CRP. And like I said, feel free to call me. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and close. Hopefully we have some more reports over the next several months, and I'll periodically come back to this. Thank you very much for your time.